All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Laura Skwadzinski, and welcome to Fake It Till You Make It, Why Imposter Syndrome Can't Be Overcome with Hard Work Alone. When the Grace Hopper organizers invited me to speak on imposter syndrome, my honest first reaction was, me? There's got to be someone more qualified. And with that, I realized I'm exactly the right person to be here today. So I'm going to tell you all about my own battle with imposter syndrome, how I came to realize the ways it was affecting my mindset, and what I do to push back against the negative effects and instead leverage it as my superpower. As a senior leader in PwC Digital, an elected official in my town, and especially as a woman in tech, I continue to experience imposter syndrome. I worry that if people realized all the things I don't know, they wouldn't trust me. I pushed myself to the brink of burnout in an attempt to prove myself, and it wasn't pretty. I used to think that I was the only one who felt like a fraud, that if I worked hard enough and got to a certain level of expertise, the feeling of fakery would go away. But through research and personal experience, I learned that's not the case. I've done significant research on imposter syndrome and how to develop a growth mindset, and I've used that research to stop imposter syndrome from limiting me. Beyond myself, I've coached my staff and built a work culture that helps others overcome their doubts. And today, I'm going to teach you how to do the same. So let me start by telling you a personal story. When I was a kid, I couldn't run a mile to save my life. I was a nerdy bookworm. I loved school, except the 2 days a year we had to do the mile fitness test in gym class. I would struggle through my 15-minute mile, and I figured I just wasn't sporty. No problem, I've got other talents. But I started to challenge that assumption while doing an internship not too far from here in Sarasota, Florida. Finding it hard to make friends as a 19-year-old in a town where the average age was 56, I spent my first 2 weeks lonely, crying myself to sleep. Then I decided enough was enough. I either needed to quit my internship and go home, or I needed to find something else to do with my time, besides trying to casually start conversations when I spotted someone my age in the aisles at Walmart. I decided to spend the summer trying to do two things I had previously thought were impossible: learn to cook and learn to run. Although I didn't know how to make anything but Kraft Easy Mac when I started, teaching myself to cook turned out to be pretty simple. I DVR'd episodes of Rachel Ray's 30-minute meals, and then each day I cooked along with the show. The running, though, was much harder. I mapped out a 1-mile loop in my neighborhood, and every day I would walk and run around that loop. Each day I tried to run a little more and walk a little less, until after about 6 weeks, I could jog the whole 1-mile loop without stopping. I ended up doing a 5K race at the end of the summer, and I was so proud of myself. But I had taken a lot of walk breaks in that 5K. I hadn't actually run the whole thing. And when I went back to college and told my friends about my accomplishment, they weren't that impressed. I think the reply was, my grandma does 5Ks. Still, I started running every so often to stay in shape. It just wasn't every day or for long distances like the serious athletes. After I graduated, I started trying to run longer. I used to think I couldn't run a mile, but I had now gone past that, and I wanted to test my limits and see how far I could go. I ran a 5-mile race, then a 10K, then a 10-mile race, and then a half marathon. In spite of that accomplishment, though, I still didn't feel like a real runner since I was never the fastest, and it took a lot of hard work. But through all that repeated hard work, I ended up running a full marathon, and then a few more, and eventually breaking a world record to become the youngest woman to run a marathon in all 50 states. I've now run over 100 marathons and ultra marathons, including a 50-mile trail race in Colorado, my longest distance to date. But even after all those miles, one day I was at Orange Theory Fitness, a new hobby I'd picked up, and we had a coach who didn't know me. I ran my heart out on the treadmill, and after the class, the coach said, "Great job today. You must be a runner, huh?" That simple question made me so uncomfortable. Who was I to pretend that I was a runner? I didn't know how to answer her, and I finally responded with something like, kind of, but I didn't run in school or anything. 100 marathons and a world record later, and I still didn't consider myself a runner. That's imposter syndrome. And the harder you work, the more like you feel like you've really tricked everyone. Surely it was easy for everyone else, and you're the only one who had to work this hard. So now carry that over to work. We all want to impress our colleagues and our bosses to get that next promotion. We get uncomfortable and we dismiss the compliments that come our way, not realizing that every time we do that, we send a message to everyone else that we didn't have to work that hard, and it makes them wonder what they're doing wrong. Everyone works harder and harder to keep up, and suddenly we're all burned out and still wondering why it's only me. Well, according to the 2021 Women in Workplace report, 42% of women report feeling burned out. That's nearly half of us. It's not just you. And we need to start being more transparent about how hard we're working to stay afloat, or we're going to be perpetuating the cycle of imposter syndrome for our colleagues. Imposter syndrome, formally defined, is when high-achieving individuals don't have confidence in their own qualifications. In spite of outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, those with imposter syndrome believe they aren't really that bright, and they've just managed to fool anyone who thinks otherwise. People with imposter syndrome might work harder in an attempt to feel equal with their peers. And like I pointed out, that only further perpetuates their belief that their success is not truly deserved. Let me tell you about some of the key behaviors of those with imposter syndrome, and I'd love for you to raise your hand or chime in on the chat if you recognize these signs yourself. Behavior number 1 is diligence. Like I mentioned before, you work harder and harder to prevent others from figuring out you're an imposter. Maybe you do extra research before asking your boss a question, or you proofread your email 10 times before you send it. Those aren't bad things to do, but you do them behind the scenes, and you believe you're the only one who has to go to those lengths. Behavior number 2, the use of charm. In the US, women are socialized to be agreeable and likable. We seek praise from our bosses and admiration from our peers. And certainly, as we're seeing here at GHC, networking is incredibly beneficial to growing your career. But if you have imposter syndrome, you might think that your success is because of your personality rather than your hard work. You get along with your boss, and then you wonder if they're only praising your work because they like you. So behavior number 3, feeling of being a phony and a fear of getting caught. I get this one in consulting a lot. I go to a new client and I worry that they won't find my past experience relevant. Going back to how I opened this talk, who am I to speak on imposter syndrome? I'm not a psychologist, but I'm coming right out and I'm telling you that so that I can nip that fear of discovery in the bud. Because that fear of getting caught leads me to behavior number 4, avoiding displays of confidence. You don't want to feel like you're embellishing your talents, so you downplay them. This is one of the worst parts of imposter syndrome. Those who experience it will often hold back from putting themselves forward for opportunities, thinking they're not qualified. And even when you do throw your hat in the ring for that new project or promotion, your lack of confidence makes you seem less qualified to others. So you don't get the opportunity, and then it confirms your belief that you didn't have a chance. It might seem nice to be humble, but it's limiting your opportunities for career progression. Now, you might notice that these 4 behaviors aren't all bad. In fact, recent research from the Wharton Ideas Lab has found that imposter syndrome can be a double-edged sword that helps to motivate and can improve interpersonal relationships. Imposter syndrome is much more complex than most people think, so it's critical to make sure you harness its good side and rein in the bad side. So let's talk about a few tactical things you can do to help yourself overcome the negative side of imposter syndrome. First, start keeping an accolade file and store any good feedback you get. I use an Evernote document, and whenever someone sends me a nice email or says something good about my work, I put it in the doc. And if I'm having a bad day, I can go look at it for a quick confidence boost. Then when it's time for annual performance reviews, I can easily compile a summary of my accomplishments for the year. Win-win. Next, I want you to set a goal to work toward. Think about the situations where you feel like a fraud and envision how you'd like to feel in those situations instead. Sometimes naming how you'd like to feel can kickstart you actually feeling that way. Brené Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart, is a great read to help teach you how to name and differentiate between feelings, and her research has found that accurately naming an emotion can give us power. Imposter syndrome is often exacerbated by comparison, so I'd like you to try consciously checking and flipping your comparisons around. We all know that people often post only the highlight reel on social media, but it's important to recognize that that's happening at work too. For example, during performance reviews, I'm sending my boss a summary of that accolade file I mentioned, not a rundown of every mistake I've made all year. At work, everyone's presenting the finished product, but you're seeing both the good and the bad in your own work, plus the whole difficult process it took to get there. Instead of comparing yourself in a negative way, think about how another person might act in your situation. Sometimes we're being harder on ourselves than we would be to someone we're coaching. To that end, when something isn't going right, ask for help. Maybe you're selling yourself short and you're struggling because of the circumstances, not because of something you're doing wrong. Or maybe the person you ask for help can point you in a new direction for something to learn. I could give a whole nother lightning talk on cultivating a growth mindset, but today I'll just remind you that you're always a work in progress. And when you ask for help confidently, you're conveying that you know your own limitations and you're working to grow past them. Check out Carol Dweck's amazing book, Mindset, for more on how people with a fixed mindset are less likely to flourish than people with a growth mindset, who believe that their abilities can be developed. And along with developing a growth mindset, here's another confidence booster. Try exposing yourself completely. Discuss imposter syndrome with your peers and bosses, and be really candid about how it impacts you. You might be surprised to realize that they feel the same way, and that can go a long way toward making you feel better. By bringing imposter syndrome out into the open, you'll not only get reassurance in your own abilities, but you'll also conquer its power over you as something not to be named. And finally, remember that true imposters generally don't suffer from imposter syndrome. There's a cognitive bias called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which has found that individuals of low ability tend to overestimate their abilities, while individuals of high ability tend to underestimate theirs. Basically, people who know nothing don't know what they don't know. So if you're worried you're a fraud, you're probably more skilled than you think. Now, whether you're an individual contributor or if you're a CEO managing a team of thousands, you can contribute to a work culture that helps others overcome their imposter syndrome. First, as I already mentioned, it's great to name imposter syndrome and discuss its prevalence, just like I'm doing today. Talk about how it impacts you and how you deal with it, making it comfortable for others to do the same. We can all learn from each other. As a leader, you should set clear success criteria for assignments. A lot of people who experience imposter syndrome are perfectionists at heart, who think anything less than 100% is a failure waiting to be discovered. And I'm not even going to talk about those people who say you need to give 200% or 1,000%. That's not possible. Remind your team that not every assignment deserves 100% and set really explicit guidelines for success so people aren't stressed about always needing to go above and beyond. Here's one of the toughest things to do in today's environment, but I'll put it out there anyway. Resource appropriately. And if you can't do that, scale your expectations to the resources you have. My own burnout came during the Great Resignation, when a string of departures left me trying to do the jobs of 6 people simultaneously. It took a bit for me to overcome my fear that I should be able to do it all. But I finally called out the problem to my boss and reminded him that, in fact, I couldn't do the work of an entire team by myself. I told him that until we could hire more people, I was going to intentionally deprioritize some tasks and to let me know if or when I dropped the ball on something important. It felt good to call out what I was doing so he could give me feedback on the approach. And I knew that if I messed up, he understood the reasons why and wasn't going to just think of me as a failure. If you're the boss and your expectations aren't being met, review specifically why the project is failing and what changes could be made to help it succeed. Create a culture where asking for help and delegating to others isn't just okay, but it's actually encouraged. And while we're talking about failures, what does it look like when someone on your team messes up? Your unconscious facial expressions and body language can mean the difference between someone asking for help and sweeping a mistake under the rug next time. Make sure you're creating an environment where it's okay to fail and where mistakes are seen as a routine step in the journey to learning and improving. Share your own mistakes with your team to lead by example. Make sure you also share positive feedback as well as your constructive criticism. I get it. We're all pressed for time, especially in this world of back-to-back Zoom meetings that don't even give you time for bathroom breaks. When we do get precious one-on-one time, it can be easy to focus on the negative and forget to share the positive. But that's disastrous for people fighting imposter syndrome. Make sure to share positive feedback, even if it's a quick thank you via email or IM. And with constructive criticism, help your staff foster a growth mindset by sharing how you learn the skills they're trying to develop or pointing them to other resources to improve. Your expectation should be progress, not perfection. So to wrap this up, I want you to imagine being at work and making a mistake, and then calling the mistake out to your whole team. It's the opposite of our natural inclination to show our best selves, but it fosters a growth mindset and counters the idea that you need to be ashamed of where you are now. Progress, not perfection. Rather than the fake it till you make it approach that pushes everyone to secretly work harder, like a duck swimming serenely while his feet are furiously paddling under the surface, ask for help and be transparent about the hard work you're putting in to get results. Diligence and hard work is a good thing, and those traits of imposter syndrome can help you excel. But when you admit that you're paddling furiously to stay afloat, you open yourself up to new ways of working. Maybe someone else can teach you a better way of doing things. And being open to new approaches can be like a life raft, saving you from exhaustion and burnout. Finally, ditch the perfectionist mentality. And remember that everyone does some things well and other things not so well. You don't have to be afraid to let people realize that you're not an expert in everything. No one is. There's a sweet spot in between downplaying your accomplishments and being overconfident and then feeling like a fraud. Track the accolades you get, and when you see trends in what you're being recognized for, claim your excellence in those areas, even as you admit where you're still trying to grow. That kind of authenticity can be rare in the corporate world, but if we all take these steps, we can create a new work environment that harnesses the motivation of imposter syndrome without letting it push us to burnout. Thank you so much for coming to my talk today. Don't forget that you can reference my iPoster from the GHC app to get a refresher on the key points. I'd also love to connect with you in real time. You can find me at the PwC booth at the Expo today from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. or follow me on social media. I'm most active on Instagram, but I do my best to post the ups and the downs to help fight my own feelings of fraud. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of GHC.